Today, you are going to get a front row seat to the incredible Springbok coaching career of Nick Mallett. Nick, welcome to Front Row Rugby.
Cheers, thanks very much for having me.
It's great to have you here. Now, just before we begin our conversation, let's have a look at today's trivia question. Who captained the Springboks against Romania at the 1995 Rugby World Cup? Now, if you know the answer to the question, you can put it in the comment section down below. And we'll also find out if Nick knows the answer, but we'll do that at the end of our conversation. Nick, let's start in 1997. At the start of the year, there was a changing of the guard. Carl du Plessis became the new Springbok coach. My understanding is that you were actually in contention, but the feeling among SA Rugby was that perhaps you were a little bit too outspoken. Can you tell us just how close were you to actually getting the job at that stage?
Well, I wasn't sure how close I was. I was an assistant to Andre Markgraaff, and so was Carl. And we'd gone on that end-of-year tour in 96, which had been quite a successful tour to Argentina and to Wales and to France. France first and then Wales. And I thought we'd both contributed nicely to it. And then there wasn't an interviewing process. It was just a decision taken by the executive to give it to Carl. And perhaps perhaps they were right. I am outspoken, and I'm probably less easy to manage than Carl was. And I think at that time, the executive they sort of felt that they were in charge, which they are, of South African rugby, but also they like to have an influence over the coach and over the team he selects and stuff like that. And I understood that if you were going to take a job as big as the Springbok job, you needed to do it on your own terms. And so perhaps they thought, hang on a sec, we'd give it to Carl first, see how he goes. If he goes well, then then all's good. And if things didn't go so well, then there was an opportunity again later on in 97.
And as we know, it didn't go well, and so Carl was out after the Tri-Nations, and they did bring you in. Can you explain to us what the process was actually like in terms of you being hired? Because let's face it, it's not like you buy the Sunday Argus and then you flip a few pages and see the Springbok head coach being advertised there.
Yeah, no, it is very much. You get asked to be interviewed. I got a call from the CEO, who, funny enough, at that time was Rian Oberholzer, who's come back into rugby and is now the CEO as well. So it was back in 97, and Louis Lake was the president at the time, and I was called in for an interview with the executive. And I learned pretty quickly that I was the only one being interviewed. So I got up to Johannesburg, and then it was simply a question of just making sure that that I was able to get what I wanted, which was I was able to select the team that I wanted, the team that ran out. Obviously, there was a selection committee for picking a squad. But the team that actually started the game and the replacement bench would be my responsibility. And also, I didn't want any interference from the executive. I said that that you run the business side, and I'll be running the rugby side. And also, I wanted to be able to appoint my own assistant coaches and my manager. And so it wasn't too demanding. I mean, nowadays it would seem to be that's completely logical. I mean, every single international coach is allowed that. But at the time, it was a little bit more. A little bit not arrogant, but perhaps they thought, being the coach is good enough, and we'll tell you who your assistant should be, and we'll give you some advice as to who should play as well. And I didn't want that. So I was fortunate. Things hadn't gone well for Carl, and except in the last game where they did very, very well against Australia. But be that as it may, I was given the opportunity, and thankfully they agreed to my conditions.
Nick, I've had quite a few former Springboks on the show, many of them who played under you, some of them senior players, and they told me, some of them anyway, that before they went on that end-of-year tour, some of them were actually planning on retiring, and you actually held a series of meetings with these guys and talked them out of retiring, talked them out of quitting. What did you actually tell them?
I've been coaching Boland against all these provincial sides for the previous 2 years, and we'd got to sort of 6th or 7th, 5th, 6th, 7th. We never made a Super Rugby position, but we were pretty competitive against the Bulls and Province and the Sharks. And so I knew the players really well. We'd analyze them with the Boland team. And I knew I'd been on tour with them in the previous, in 96. So I understood how good they were. And I also had a very clear idea of what team I wanted to select. So it was a lucky start. I was able to go to the players who I knew would start. A Henry Honeyball at fly-off. I didn't want him to play centre. I didn't think, I knew he could play centre, but I wanted him at fly-off. I knew the opposition didn't like playing against Henry Honeyball at fly-off. So I wanted him at fly-off. I wanted, Dick Muir in at centre. He was playing some very good rugby at that time. Obviously, the pack, it selected itself. It was really an outstanding group of players. But I didn't want them not to go on that end-of-year tour. It had been a difficult year. They'd lost to the Lions, very unfortunately, and then they hadn't had a good rugby championship. So I thought perhaps some of them would say, listen, we'd like a break for a couple of months and then start again the following year. So I did a tour around. So I went to Bloemfontein, Pretoria, Joburg, and obviously to Durban. And I spoke to the guys in Cape Town. And I spoke probably to 21, 22 players who would be definite starters and ones who'd be around on the bench, but key players. And only one actually said that, he didn't want to go on tour. He really badly needed a break. And that was De Beer, who was an absolutely marvelous fullback. And I remember saying to him, Juba, you must understand that this is going to be a successful tour. And it was a funny thing. When you're young, you have such confidence. And I just knew that this team was going to gel well, and I knew that we could go overseas and perform well. And I said to him, if the side does really well and the guy who plays fullback does really well, it's going to be harder for you to get your place back. Obviously, the incumbent player has the advantage. And I remember him saying, listen, Nick, I'm just trying to get over a few injuries, and it's been a long season, and I really need a break. And he said, I'll back myself for the following year. And of course, Percy had a really good tour, and I ended up never picking Juba, despite the fact that I really thought he was the most magnificent fullback. He was, I think, at the time about 32, 33, and Percy was 23. There was a 10-year difference. So going towards the World Cup in 99, when Percy was playing so well, I just decided to keep him. And I would have loved to coach Juba. I think he would have done a brilliant job for South Africa. But he was the only one who said no. There were a couple others, Osturant. I remember talking him out of retirement. I remember chatting to, Henry Honeyball he didn't know whether he wanted to go. And Gary, Gary was very frustrated with the way that the team had been performing, Gary Teichmann. And I remember saying, listen, Gary, just give it one more go, give it this tour. I promise you it's going to be different, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. First of all, you're going to enjoy the tour, and secondly, we're going to win the games. And luckily, that's exactly what happened. And it was just a tremendous tour, just a fantastic way to kick off your Springbok tenure.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video, why not consider becoming a patron? It's my dream, guys, to do this full time, and with a small financial contribution, you can help me realize that dream. The link and the QR code is appearing on your screen right now, and I'll also put it down in the description area for you to go and click on at a later stage if you would like to do so. And by becoming a patron, I promise there will be great benefits for members. Now let's get back to the interview. I remember it very fondly, Nick, that 1997 end-of-year tour. I was in what they used to call Standard 6 at the time, not to make you feel old or anything, but obviously very special memories. So your first test match as Springbok coach was against Italy in Bologna. When I ask the players how they were feeling before their debuts, generally the answer is they were nervous and they were excited, sort of at the same time. How were you feeling as the coach?
It was strange. We'd had a really good 10 days in Johannesburg, and there was a good feeling in the group. The team was very happy under Gary Teichmann. The side I'd selected, I could see the players felt confident that each player was in his right position and that they were really ready for this tour. And it was a nice, relaxed feeling. And I thought we were going to go in, and I must admit, I thought we'd be, 20 points up at halftime against Italy and go on to win, 60-odd points to 20. I got it right. We did win by 60-odd points to 20, but we weren't 20 points up at halftime. It was funny. The team went out, and there was almost they were a little bit tense and a little bit, over-eager. So a couple of things, a couple of overthrows in the line-out, a few drop passes if one of them had stuck, we would have scored. The Italians scored off one of those overthrows, and suddenly it was something like 23-21 or at halftime. And I remember going into halftime and just saying, guys, just relax. Honestly, there's a bit of feeling, a bit of nervousness, a bit of panic. I wasn't, I certainly didn't. Later on in my career, I used to, get a bit fed up if they didn't perform well. But I remember them just saying to them, these guys, they can't live with us if we just hold on to the ball. Just hold on to it. Dick, just call the moves in the back line, forwards, give them front foot ball. When we get to within 10, 15 meters, let's score the driving balls. Don't go for pulse, kick for the corner. And we just, we kicked in. We scored straight after halftime, scored again, and then we got to the 60. But it was, it was a really nice feeling afterwards. But that first 40 minutes was definitely a little bit more stressful than I had expected.
I can imagine. So after that win over the Italians, we played a 2-test series against France. We won the first test match despite a fierce fight back from the French in the second half. And then there was that magnificent win over them in Paris, 52-10. All sorts of records were broken on that occasion. How satisfying was it to win that series?
Yeah, exceptionally so. I'd spent a long time. I spent 9 years playing in France and had come back to South Africa. And it was not quite going home, but it felt a little bit like my second home, France. So our first game was, we were well ahead. We were leading, I think, 36-15 or something like that. And again, this little bit of trepidation came into the team. Last 10 minutes, we tried to protect our lead and started kicking, but didn't kick accurately. And the one thing that France can do is they can counterattack really well. So when they counter-attacked, they scored a couple of tries, and suddenly we were hanging on. I think it was 36-32 or something like that, the score at the end. And the lesson we took out of that was, that side, the French side, were on their way to get another 40-odd points if we carried on attacking them. Instead of at 36, we couldn't believe that the team on the field couldn't believe they were doing so well. And I think they started thinking, okay, we'll stick it out, and we'll sort of try and slow it down and let's play some conservative rugby. Completely the wrong thing to do. So the preparation for the second test in Paris, I mean, I knew the French couldn't live with our physicality and our skill. We just were scoring some fantastic tries. And I said to the guys, we must, honestly back yourselves. You must play what's in front of you. Don't just kick it. Have a good look. If there's an overlap and we're in our 22, I want you to have a go. If the overlap closes, if they manage to scramble, and they've got a good defensive structure, then we kick after that. But this team, if we get up against the French, I know them very, very well. They're going to lose heart, and when they lose heart, they stop tackling, and when they stop tackling, they're going to concede a lot of points. And oddly enough, that was exactly what I got that one right. We started the game, we scored after 90 seconds. I think Andre Fenter ran straight through their team. They didn't look at all keen on having a test match. Halftime, we were up by 20-odd points, 25 points. I could see some of the French came off. They were crying. The crowd was booing them. And I got into the change room and I said to them, guys, you're on the cusp of history here. I mean, no one has ever beaten France at home, by over 50 points. We're already 25, 26 points up. Just keep going. We must keep going, keep being positive. Remember what happened last week when we went into our shell a bit and they came back. Don't allow that. And the team was magnificent. They just really, I must admit, the French had to be very poor, but we were very good. I mean, Peter Rousseau that day, 4 tries, magnificent counterattack. The last try, I think there were 17 or 18 passes, and Henry Honeyball ended up by scoring the try. It was the most remarkable game in that we tried to run off the field. I went down into the change room and the team hadn't come. They hadn't arrived yet. So I went out to see what was going on, and they were doing a lap of honor. And when they came into the change room, I said to Gary, geez, isn't that a bit arrogant? We're not playing at home. And he said, Nick, I tried to come off, and the French committee guys, their officials said, this crowd admired so much the way you've played today. They want to congratulate you. And so it was a South African side getting applauded by a French crowd. I mean, it just never happens, And so that was, early on in my career, that was one of the most memorable games of my tenure, really.
Special memories indeed, followed of course by those wins over England and then that hammering of Scotland, 68-10, when James Small became a Springbok record try scorer on that occasion. And then into 1998, Nick, home series wins over Ireland as well as Wales and England. And then it was time for the Tri-Nations. And let's be honest, for the first 2 years of the Tri-Nations, the Springboks hadn't really been able to get it right. We went away from home. We beat Australia in Perth. Now, the way that I remember it as a schoolboy watching was just, we got a win over the Wallabies away from home. But having watched that match again, not that long ago, I think that we were a little bit fortunate to get away with that one. What are your thoughts? What can you tell us?
You're 100% correct. Again, it's a strange thing, the psychological aspect of rugby. It's not necessarily just the physical preparation and planning and technical side of rugby. The mental side of rugby is probably equally, if not more important, because there were a number of players who'd never won overseas. There were especially, the guys who played for the Cheetahs, or the guys who played for the Lions, or that combined team, whatever they were called when they combined the two franchises, they'd never won. A guy like Andre Venter had played 17 times overseas and never won a game. So it doesn't matter that you're going with the Springboks. You still think this is an insurmountable, obstacle to try and win a game. Despite the fact that we were on a good winning streak and there was tremendous confidence in the team, there's still that undercurrent of, we're playing against Australia in Australia. They've got Gregan, they've got Larkham, they've got, a good pack Finnegan, a good pack of fours. They changed their coach to Rod McQueen, who was a very, very good coach. And there was a little bit of uncertainty. And of course, I think we were very lucky in that game. I remember just taking a quick tap penalty and scoring when, 9 out of 10 times you'd have taken the 3 points. But he was just so fed up that nothing was happening. And he was a skillful enough player, just that he just went, and had the ability to beat a couple of Australians on his own and score. But there was again a bit of nervousness in the team. When we were on attack, we'd send 2 or 3 too many to a breakdown, so we didn't have enough on attack. And at the end of the game, we were defending about 30 meters out, and I'd got some of the bench on, and I think it was Ollie Leroux. You played their scrum off and rolled over a loose ruck. It looked to me like a penalty to Australia. The whole of Australia thought it was a penalty. And the referee just said, play on. He just said that he'd fallen over and said, play on. You get that luck when things are running for you. We were leading by, I think it was 13-12 or something like that. A penalty there, Burke would have kicked it over with his eyes closed. So it was or Mortlock, whoever was their kicker, but it was fortunate. I was unfortunate with some decisions as a coach, but that was definitely a day when we were on the lucky side. We played badly and won, and I was able to say that to the team. Guys, you must understand, we were really poor today. This was probably our worst performance in 10 tests, 9-10 tests. And going against New Zealand, I said, if we perform like that against New Zealand, you're going to get 20 points. They're going to put 20 to 30 points, and that's going to be very humiliating for us because we're a decent side. So we got to shake ourselves out of this lethargy and nervousness, and we've just got to, just take them on.
And that's exactly what happened the following week. A memorable win in Wellington, 13-3. Again, we were tackling a lot in that test match, but then right near the end, Peter Rousseau scored that memorable try. I've been told that the move was actually Henry Honeybull's idea. What can you tell us, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. We were on the plane going over, and I remember saying he was the best defensive fly-off the world's ever seen. And I still believe he remains so. There's no other fly-off who defends like he does. Johnny Wilkinson was great, and there are other players around who do tackle at 10, but he was devastating, Henry. And I knew that if I said to him, can you think up an attacking move where you would struggle to defend? You wouldn't know who'd be getting the ball, because the key to that isn't just running at a player one-on-one. Everyone's going to tackle you. You've got to put a bit of dark into that guy's mind. He's got to think which of these 2 players is getting the ball. And if he takes the wrong decision, then the gap is there for you. And he said, okay. And we'd played Australia and there'd been nothing. And it was back on the Wednesday, I think, before the New Zealand game. In the coach, he came to the front of the coach. He said, Coach, I've got one. And I'd forgotten I'd asked him. It was such a long time ago. I said, what have you got? He said, I've got a move. I've thought up a move that I would struggle to defend against. I said, just tell me. And on the back of the envelope, it was a left-hand scrum. I put in. Just plays me short. I go up there blindside flank at Kronfeld, and I dummy to Joost because he's a dangerous player, and they're going to have Mertens at 10. Mertens is going to chase Joost because he's Joost, and then out of that blind spot, we're going to bring in the blindside wing Peter Rousseau. And I thought, cheapers, that sounds good. So at the practice, I didn't tell the reserve side at all. I said, you've got to defend this move. We had a little chat about it. And the players themselves, they didn't even walk it through. They just said, okay, let's do it. And they were all such good rugby players that the timing, that Henry Honeyball's timing to stop the blindside flanker, just timing on the run round, pulled Franco Smith. Funny, he was the reserve flower. He pulled Franco Smith. And Henry just played Peter Rousseau into the gap. And he went and scored under the poles against our reserve team without having a hand touched on him. We did it once at practice, only once. And I said, guys, we're going to keep that until we get a left-hand scrum in their 22, are put in. When we're in that situation, we do it and we got to score. And blow me down, that was a wonderful, wonderful execution. Exactly the same thing happened. And it depends on a fly-off taking it really into the jaws of the blindside flanker, because you've got to create the hole between the open side flanker and the opposition number 10. As soon as they separate, Peter Rousseau had the gap to go through. It was the most wonderful feeling seeing that. I can tell you, we were in those days. You didn't sit up in a box. We were just in amongst the crowd. And when Peter Rousseau scored, there was dead silence you could hear a pin drop. And I just heard from the New Zealand group off the left, a guy just saying, "Oh shit!" He realised that we'd broken their line. And I think we were up then, I can't remember, was it 13-3 or something like that? I think we won 13-6 in the end. But, luckily they started with a poor kicker, and they had Mertens they brought on in the second half a bit late, but they had I've lost his name now, but he was the guy who had all the skills and thrills and was about a 60-70% kicker, but that day he missed a couple of kicks. But we finished really well. I mean, that day, when the bench came on, and Ollie Roux, who'd almost given us a heart attack in the game, I remember he must have had 7 ball carries in 10 minutes. And I remember one run of his was about 20 meters, bumping New Zealanders off, and we finished stronger than they did. So even though they held on to the ball more than we did, during that day, I just knew they were not going to score. I mean, if you're playing up against a backline of Joost, one of the best defensive scrum half, and at that time best attacking and defensive scrum in the world, Henry Honeymall by far the best defensive. You had Peter Muller tackles anything that moves, and you have Andre Snyman who tackles everything. I mean, they tried to do all there, and they had Christian Cullen, Jonah Lomu, they had the whole lot there. They had their best team, that team that played us the year before, and they couldn't get through us. They just could not get through us. Our defense was absolutely brilliant, and it was one of probably the most memorable games that I had with the Springboks, that win.
And I can tell you that at 4:30 in the morning when you're waking up as a schoolboy, it's wonderful to watch and experience something like that as well. So Nick, you say that was the most memorable one, but you know what? Something else that was very memorable, we're 23-5 down with about 15 minutes to go in Durban against the All Blacks as well, as it turns out, and we just complete one of the greatest comebacks in all of rugby history, I think. What is going through your mind when we're that far behind with just a few minutes left on the clock?
Yeah, there was a lot of frustration because I predicted to the players that this was going to happen. And the reason why was we'd won 2 games away from home. And this was our 3rd game against Australia. And Australia had won, I think, they'd won 1 game against New Zealand and lost to us by 1 point. If they'd beaten us, if they won or lost against us, we were still going to have to play them in the final, in the last game, and that would decide the result. So the players in their own minds thought this isn't really that important. I don't want to injure myself in this game. I want to play in the final game against Australia because that's to win the championship. And there was a little bit of just a relaxed atmosphere going into that game. And when you play the All Blacks, who are under pressure, they've lost to South Africa, they've lost to Australia, they're coming overseas. There was a huge amount of pressure on their coach, John Hart. You never take it easy against the All Blacks. You've got to be up for them. And if you're not up physically for them, then you're going to struggle. And they played really well in that first half. We were poor. We were dreadfully poor. And it's the first time I really got stuck into that team at halftime. I just said to them, guys, you carry on playing like that. There are guys on the bench who I'll start the next Saturday. And I'm going to, you are letting yourselves down so badly here. You're letting the South African public down so badly. And there will be repercussions. You carry on playing like this. I'll make 8 changes because I had full confidence in the guys on the bench that they were outstanding players coming off the bench. And I think that woke them up a little bit because I think we were down 24-3 at one point, 23-3 I think it was, or 5, 20, I can't remember. But we ended up with 15 minutes to go, or 12 minutes to go. I think Just from the back of a line-out scored a wonderful dummy didn't break to score. And the team ran back. I mean, it was almost the kicker ran to the ball to kick it, and the team ran back. And I remember getting a message on in the last 10 minutes, and I said, they are protecting their lead. So they're kicking the ball to us. We must kick nothing to them. No kicks. We're going to hold on to the ball, whatever. 5 yards from our line, I don't care. We hold on. We get a penalty. We kick for touch. We win the line-out. We hold on to the ball. And the last 10 minutes, we had all the possession. Every time they got the ball, if it was a turnover, a knock-on, they got the ball. They just kicked it back to us. So they were doing what we had done in that test match against France when we were leading. We thought we could just play our time. And at international rugby, you can't do that. Then suddenly Bob Kinstad scored a try, and then at the end of the game, we get a driving ball, and we get over the line, and Dalton claims the try. I think he scored it. I hope he scored it, but it was anyway. It's in the record books, and we won the game. But it was more frustration, funny enough, because I knew we were much better than that. I knew we should never have been 23-5 down at home against the All Blacks. It's an attitude thing. And the moment they changed their attitude, the team was good enough to score those 3 points. And there's that momentum I'm talking about, the psychological momentum of the All Blacks desperate for a win and trying to protect a lead. Wow, you just can't do it, And so, moving on to that final, we went in with the right mindset there. We can't protect anything. We've just got to go and beat these guys, score more points, and keep scoring more points if we can. And they were a really good team. I mean, the year later, they won the World Cup.
Indeed, they did. Let's talk about that match against the Wallabies at Ellis Park. It was a much better performance as well from the Springboks. Memorable win as well. You remember the Bobby Skinstad try with the dummy pass and all that. What did it actually feel like when the referee blew the final whistle and we had won the Tri-Nations for the first time?
Just relief, absolute relief. It's a strange thing. You're so stressed as a coach. You know how much it means to the South African public. You're desperate not to let them down. And, the fact that we hadn't won a rugby championship yet was weighing heavily. And the fact that we'd won 3, we were playing Australia, who could still win 3 if we had to beat them. We had to make sure that we got 4 out of 4, and it was the team played really well. I mean, that was a really good Australian side. I mean, it was the one team that we did battle with. They were a team that had very, very intelligent rugby players. As I said, they won the World Cup in '99 with that nasty drop goal, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But I mean, John Eales was a brilliant captain. They had a good tight 5 who managed to hold up against us. Gregan and Larkham were as competitive as Joost and Henry. So it was like 2 heavyweight boxers fighting, but we got on the right side of it that day. We played very well, and as I said, just great relief that we managed to win that championship.
We don't have to talk about that 99 semi-final.
I'd rather not, quite frankly. It was on my birthday. It was the worst birthday present I've ever had in my life.
How awful. Nick, end of year tour 1998, we were still winning, but maybe the performances were not as clinical. I remember the late try against Wales and maybe a little bit of a stuttering effort against Scotland, and maybe the Ireland win was a little bit better. But with the performances not being as good, what would you put that down to?
So it was I'll take complete blame for that. It was, I think as a coach, and I was quite young, and it was the first time I'm 42 years old, I think 41, 42. And I wasn't experienced enough to realize that you've got to reset goals all the time. You can't say we've gone 18, 17 winning games and we're going to carry on for another 17 with the same team at the same. It doesn't happen like that. The team itself, gets not overconfident, but they're pretty sure of themselves. And so little things change. First of all, what I should have done is prior to that tour, I should have sat down with the players, the senior players, of which there were 6 leaders I could have taken, and said to them, guys, let's plan this tour properly. I think it's the end of a long year, a really long year. And I think what's going to be helpful for this team is for us to mix and match in the games we play. And in those games, perhaps we could, in having one Springbok team that goes out every single Saturday, the same, and a B team that's playing all these midweek teams, what if we mix and match, and that we could have maybe, sort of 50% of the starters and 50% of the reserves, the younger guys, then we mix and match the other, and let's try and get through this tour as a fresh group, all competing for places. And what's your thoughts on this? And they would have said no. They would have said no, because at that time it wasn't this whole thing about rotation had never come. They didn't even enjoy guys coming off the bench and playing. They would get frustrated that they were being substituted. That back home, it was almost as though they weren't playing well, and that's why they were. It wasn't anything to do with that. It was all about the number of tackles you can make in the first 30 minutes, 50 minutes, compared to a guy coming off the bench. That guy will make, he'll make 5 or 6 or 7 in 20 minutes, whereas you'll only make 2 in 20 minutes. So it's about the team rather than the individual. But we hadn't reached that stage of maturity yet. And I hadn't either, because I should have had that discussion and I didn't. And I went with what the team wanted, which was keep the team together. And there was a bit of threat, there was a threat because guys like Bob Skinstad was coming on doing really well. And the team itself was saying, well, if Bob's going to come on, whose place is he going to take? Andre Venter's place? Rusty thought he was going to take his place. Gary obviously playing number 8, and he thought, well, here's a young upstart, now I'm under pressure. And everyone loved Gary and they wanted him to stay. So, they didn't really want Bob to come into this whole mix. And so it wasn't the right way. I didn't handle it well. And I take full blame for that. I should have tried to explain to them that this end of year tour, we had to have a different focus, a different goal to expand the number of players who could play international rugby, see how they did. And then, that was the end of 98. We had the whole of 99 to prepare for the 99 World Cup. But I didn't do that. So I take that responsibility. And the team wasn't as happy as we were in 97. Under threat, each player wasn't quite as comfortable in his position. There was, at practices, the reserve team was playing well. The test team was getting angry with them. It just wasn't as happy a tour. But as I said, it's my job. That was my job, and I didn't get it right.
Even so, we did win 17 test matches in a row. So how disappointing was it to go down to England and miss out on the overall record?
Yeah, it was very, very disappointing. I believe that, that we were good enough to beat them if we just played, if we played up to our usual standards. But we didn't. We didn't play well that day. And a couple of players went on the field. They were carrying injuries. They probably should have declared that they weren't able to play at 100%. And unfortunately, they didn't perform, had to come off early. So we had a bit of, chop and changing, which disrupted things. So it was really disappointing. And the try they scored was an up and under between, and I remember Percy and Stefan de Blanche, I think, getting confused underneath it and dropping the ball, and I can't remember, one of their players dived on it in the in-goal area. So it wasn't as though they created a tremendous amount. It was just we weren't as sharp as we should have been. And despite that, I remember, we took a quick tap penalty in the very last move of the game, virtually, in our 22. In fact, Rusty took it. They started running. And I remember, I think it was Simon broke the line and passed to, he got through, and he had a pass outside into Stefan de Blanche. And their winger, he drew the fullback, but their winger, Austin Healy, I think it was running back. And he was very clever. He actually ran between the two, but in the direction of his own try line. And when Andre Snyman made the pass to Stefan, he knocked it back towards his own try line and then fell on it, and they managed to scramble it and finish up by not conceding a try. But had that pass gone to hand to Stefan, he would have gone, or Peter Rousseau, one of those two. But I think he would have gone all the way and scored. And we might have pulled that out of the fire because it was 13-7, I think. So we could have scored and converted. But the team, we weren't in a good space at that time. And as I said, I take the blame for that. If we'd freshened that team up, if I'd got them to agree to a rotation policy that wouldn't affect the World Cup selection the following year, that it was good for them because they could then freshen up. The two tests that every one of them would be played, they would give 100%. And the other two tests, they could relax and maybe take an easy week. There was so much positive that could have come out of it if I'd got it right. But I didn't speak to the players, didn't speak to the leaders, and didn't get the buy-in. And what I did was I followed what I knew they wanted, which I don't think was the right thing for the team.
Nick, as an observer, I would say that you played entertaining and attacking rugby. How would you describe your rugby coaching philosophy?
No, very much that way. Defense coaches were, they weren't specialists in those days. You'd have a forward coach and a backline coach, and maybe a skills coach, maybe a kicking coach. But the defense coach guy who came in to just work on defensive systems and structures happened after my time as a Springbok coach. We'd moved from amateur rugby into professional rugby, and every single year people were getting better at analysing opposition and working out how they were playing. And again, that was something that I was probably not as good at as other coaches, and certainly someone like Rusty, for example, was already doing analysis of the opponents while I was coaching. So, and would come to me with a couple of things. I mean, I've got two great stories about him, and both worked. Both things he said would happen did happen, and both of the one was an attacking play we had, which we scored off, and the other one was a defensive play, which we did, which we scored off as well. So it was, teams were already doing that to us, and I obviously had to get better at that, and I did when I went to Stade Francais and to Italy. But at that time, I thought that we had really good backline players, and I thought we had a great pack of forwards, and I thought we had really good, skillful ball handlers amongst the forwards. And in order to play a sort of complete game, 15-man rugby, you can't just have good backs and forwards who just like diesel trucks. You've got to have guys there with good hands, guys who can fit in. I mean, Osterrand could run and pass like a backline player. James Dalton was like a loose forward. Adrian Garvey played number 8 before he went to tight head prop. Mark Andrews played number 8 in the 95 World Cup, and he was a lock. Craner Otter had great hands. Gary Teichmann, Fenter, Rusty Erasmus, all of them could play touch rugby against the back line and do really well. And then you had backs who was big and strong, so they had the physicality if we needed to be direct, but they also had good passing skills as well, with a great back three who could counter-attack, score tries. So it would have been, I thought it would have been to the detriment of the team to try and say we're going to play a conservative game and kick the ball all the time and depend on defense. We were good enough to score tries against anyone, and we did. It was just, as I said, the mental preparation and perhaps some selections that I got wrong. But the way we played rugby, I was very proud of. We scored in the last game we played against the All Blacks. We won 46-40. We scored 6 tries. I don't think anyone has ever scored 6 tries against New Zealand well, they never had it at that moment, so I'm not sure anyone has since. But it was a really, really outstanding performance, attacking performance. They scored 4, but it was like a sort of Super Rugby game on steroids. It was a great game of rugby.
It certainly was, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Nick, in terms of your approach to man management, a lot of the Afrikaans Springboks that I've had on the show have told me that they really appreciated your honesty and your openness, something that they didn't necessarily get from Afrikaans coaches at the time. How would you describe your approach to man management?
Yeah, probably a bit heavy-handed sometimes, so probably maybe sometimes too direct. There's one thing I wish I'd done, which I know for a fact works, and that's learn the language of the player you're speaking to. So I could speak French, and so when I coached in France, Stade Francais, I could say exactly what I wanted to in their language, which makes them trust you far more easily than if you're speaking in a different language. And I wish I could speak better Afrikaans. That would be one of the things I would do differently. I would have gone on a 6-month course, and I would have tried to spend some time in Pofada or something like that, where there were only Afrikaners around, so that I'd be able to speak to people like Andre Venter and to Osterrand and to Jurg van der Westhuizen. I mean, that was their language. And if you want to try and win someone over, you've got to talk to them in their language. So it happened in Italy when I was coaching in Italy. It took me 2 years to speak Italian well enough so that I could talk to the guy about his family, about his kids, about what he was worried about. And then he could understand that I cared about him as an individual. And that's what I would have liked to have done better with the Springboks. I think the honesty I've always kept, being direct and honest. I'll equally tell someone how well he's played, and I'll give him a demonstration of what he's done well. But that same player a week later, if he's given 3 penalties away and stupid penalties that have affected the team, straight out I'll pick them up and I'll say, I've got no idea what you thought you were doing here. This is just incredibly selfish. And if you carry on doing that, I can't pick you, because I can't have a player who concedes 3 penalties and costs us 3 points and 50 meters every time you do something that breaks the law. So it's that sort of directness and honesty I think they appreciate. But as I said, there's a soft side that perhaps I should have got right.
So into 1999, I know that there were a lot of injuries, like, for example, Corne Krige had to come in and captain the Springboks on his debut against Italy. Other players as well that found themselves in the treatment room. And then we played that, I suppose it was quite strange at the time, playing Wales away from home during our season. I've been told by some of the players that before that match, Rian Oberholzer held a meeting with the players, and he said a couple of things that they weren't happy about, and they felt that maybe he didn't handle it very well. How do you remember that?
It was a tumultuous week. It was difficult. It was a game that we'd added to our schedule because I think they were paying us in pounds. So the South African Rugby Union was making a profit out of it. It didn't really fit into our preparation. We had 2 home games. Then it was supposed to go into the Rugby Championship, but anyway, we took the game, and then there was the incident where the CEO came over and put across a message to the players and to the coaches about a principle that the South African Rugby Union had taken. And the players, it did shake them up. It really did shake them up. It could have been handled better by both the SARU. I mean, it's the sort of thing one would expect. That message should be put across perhaps right at the beginning of the season, before we even start Super Rugby, so that all the players are aware of it while they're going through the Super Rugby. So when it gets to the international series, it's not a big surprise when selections are made. So to bang it to them just before a test match, wasn't a good idea. And I wouldn't like to look upon that as an excuse, but that was the least well prepared mentally team that I've coached. They were thinking of other things all the way up to that Saturday. And then, of course, we must remember that Wales, who was the coach, he came from New Zealand and won the World Cup in 2011. Graham Henry. Graham Henry had taken the Welsh job, having been head coach of Auckland, and Auckland Blues had won all the Six Nations games, and he'd had a year with them, and so we'd already had that tough game the year before, which you mentioned. We didn't perform particularly well against Wales in our first game. That was at a neutral venue as well. It was in London, and playing Wales at the Welsh Stadium was with a team that wasn't mentally focused on the game. It just wasn't a good idea, and we were deservedly beat. That was just a poor performance.
And then we were beaten quite badly overseas in the Tri-Nations as well. First against Australia, and then in Dunedin, 28-0. Sorry, I think it was actually the other way around. New Zealand was first, and then the Australia match. I want to focus a little bit on that 28-0 in Dunedin. When you look back, I've been told that you guys were preparing for a wet weather match, and then you woke up on the Saturday morning, and it was like the sunniest winter's day in the history of Otago. When you think of things like that, and then obviously we know about the way that you publicly admonished David Van Hesselen and Ghafi du Toit post-match. When you look back, is that a match that you wish just never actually happened?
Funny enough, it was a strange game. We had a tie disallowed that we scored. There was nothing wrong with it, and it was just before half-time. I think we were 7-0 down, and would have got us back into the game. Narkodroska, I think, went through, and they said he'd knocked it on, but it had come off his knee. And to get back in the game, you're playing away against New Zealand with two young halfbacks is a very, very tough thing. And the interesting thing was I didn't admonish them. I didn't. The press made a hell of a thing out of it because that's what the press do. What I was asked a question, what do you think the difference was between the two teams? And I remember saying, well, Marshall and Mertens have had 80 caps each. They're very, very experienced and played really well today. David Van Hesselen and Ghafi du Toit have had 0 caps. This is the first cap, and Ghafi, I think, is his second or third cap. And so experience is a big thing, and they'll learn from this. But there was a big difference and I'm 100% honest. I mean, that's not. I wasn't trying to take. I've selected them, so it wasn't as though I was saying, it's got nothing to do with me. It's all the players' fault. It was just I was just making a fact about halfbacks and experience. You have to have experienced halfbacks to win big games. But I didn't have Hurst and I didn't have Henry, and I thought I was going to take both to the World Cup. So I had to find out who were my second best. And I had Smiley Swanepoel and I think Brampan Stratton had played playing the other game. And so I was giving two a chance. And I thought it was logical and made sense. And I thought after the game what I said was logical and made sense. But of course, the press like a scapegoat, and the coach is a scapegoat. So the moment I said anything about any player, they said I was trying to pass the blame of me onto a player. I was learning lessons all the time about what to say and what not to say to the media, because when you've gone 17 wins in a row, you didn't really have to explain much, did you? And then suddenly you're you've had a couple of losses, and each time you try to be honest about them and what went wrong. And you get sometimes reported in a different way, or they take a different slant onto what you say, and that's a learning curve for a coach as well, for me as well. So it wasn't. I mean, listen, no one likes to lose. No one likes to lose by 28 points to 0. We got beaten by Australia similarly, 32 points to I can't remember 10 or 11 or 12. And it was that was World Cup year. But I knew that wasn't the team that was going to go and play in the World Cup. I knew that we had the potential to get through. And the real disappointing thing was that tour put me under a lot of pressure as a coach. And it would have been nice to have had a mentor who could phone me up and say, listen, Nick, I've been through the same thing. You got to stick to your guns. This is, what you were doing in 97, 98 was exactly the correct thing. Stick with it. You're going to the World Cup in 99. This is just a speed bump. Stick with it. Instead, you start thinking, gee, I'm going to start making changes. I'm the coach. I've got to make decisions. And that was the Gary Teichmann thing, which I acknowledge is my biggest mistake.
We're going to talk about that in a second, Nick, but I just wanted to say thank you for clarifying the press situation there. And I think you know that I'm going to ask you another question about press conferences a little bit later. But let's talk about Gary. You've brought it up. That was going to be my next question. How did you come to the decision to drop him?
It was I said a poor decision, but at the time, he was carrying a few injuries and playing on because that's the sort of type of person he is. He didn't want to let the team down. He wanted to still lead it. And but he had lower back issues. He had a neck injury. He had a sciatic nerve or some problem with his knee. And so practicing was difficult Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I very badly wanted him to take time off. So I did phone Ian McIntosh and I said to him, listen, Mac, we need to give this guy a break. He's got to have 6 weeks off, go to Mauritius or something, and then get 6 weeks really proper training to be ready for a World Cup. Because if he carries on playing Currie Cup now, he's not going to be fit enough to play in the World Cup, and he's not going to be able to hold onto his place. And Max said, listen, I coach Natal, or whatever they're, the Sharks. He's my captain, and he's going to play. So I didn't get much help from old Mac. Bless him, he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And when I'm talking about a mentor, maybe he would have been a good guy for me. But, in my mind, I said, if you have to pick a World Cup team playing in a World Cup final tomorrow, would you go with sort of Gary carrying an injury, or would you go with Bob Skinstad, who's coming back from an injury, but I'd had two doctors who told me that he was going to be fine. He was going to be back to his best. So again, you're under pressure and you decide, okay, well, I'll go in with someone who's going to have the possibility of breaking a game apart. And it was such a poor decision. It was such a poor decision because I completely underestimated the leadership issue. I thought that Rusty would take the captaincy. I offered the captaincy to Rusty, who I had a good relationship with, and I thought he was a very bright guy, and I thought he could carry the team with him, and he'd have very similar type of uniting attributes that Gary did, and he didn't want the captaincy. He said, "I'm 24, too young." To his credit, he said, "I don't think you should be dropping Gary. You should still be in the team," and then I offered it to Jurth because he was captain of the Bulls. And very experienced, and he said, well, if Gary's, he also backed Gary, but he said if Gary's not going, then I will be captain. So the leadership aspect is really important because Gary made everyone else 10% better. The fact that he was in the room, he could speak to Mark Andrews, speak to Henry Honeyball, he could have a little chat to Adrian Garvey, but at the same time he could go to Austin, he could go to the Afrikaans guys. And the way that Gary played, which would be first out of the trenches, if Gary said, you're going to, I want you guys to tackle, or let's make sure we're good under the high ball, you could be absolutely certain the first tackle would be Gary that he would make. And the first guy under the high ball, he was the guy. And then, of course, the Afrikaans guys respect that. They respect guys who put their bodies on the line like they do. So, that leadership thing was massive. And it was a sort of breakdown. I don't want to make excuses. It was a completely incorrect decision. But I must admit that having played the whole Currie Cup, Gary was, he was sore. He really sore. And going in, you only have 2 weeks to prepare for a World Cup. It would have been really difficult. So I would have had to rest him at the World Cup basically for the first 3 games and then get him going in the quarterfinal, semi-final. But they're not excuses. These are the things you have to deal with as a coach. And in retrospect, you see where you get it wrong. And I mean, I've spoken to him enough about it, and I've spoken to the public enough about it. It's something I wish I could have back. I wish I could have had that decision back. Because we got to that semi-final. We got to a situation where we'd drawn the game, and we were tied. We went into extra time. And more than anything else, you need a good leader in that period. You need someone to say, okay, guys, now, from this kickoff, we're going to tighten it up. We're going to do a driving ball. We hope we get a penalty for a collapse ball. If we don't get a penalty, I want you to attack the blind side because, we can then set up the forwards again. Then I want a long kick downfield. Don't panic. And we needed that. We needed that. And Gary gave that to the team. So as I said, that was, I strongly believe that we would have won that World Cup if I'd had him as captain of the side. We got ourselves into that situation with a leader who the team respected, but didn't have the leadership qualities that Gary had. So when you're in the semi-final or going through into a final, that little extra from a great leader would have carried us through.
Let's talk about that 1999 Rugby World Cup. Henry Honeyball is another player who missed out on the majority of the action. Jannie De Beer was the man who came in for him. We beat Scotland in the opening game, and then we had those two sort of laborious wins over Uruguay and Spain, and then into the quarterfinal, and Jannie slotted 5 drop goals, all of them in the second half. Who came up with that plan?
So we were playing golf actually in the week before the England game. We had a day off. I think it was on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, our day off. And I was playing in a 4-ball with Brendan Venter, myself, and I think it was Joost and Brad van Straten. And I was on a cart with Brendan Venter. And I think I remember it going something like this. So Brendan was on that cart with me, and he'd been red carded because he'd stamped on a player on the ground. But he still stayed on because he was a good leadership guy in the group. And I remember saying to him, I'm concerned about this England game. Our backline's not attacking the ball nice and flat. Henry's injured, and Jannie takes the ball quite deep. He takes it a bit deeper behind the advantage line. So we can't get off our backline into an attacking shape on the advantage line and across the advantage line, which makes it more difficult for our forwards to get into the game, to ruck aggressively. And I said, they don't give a lot of penalties away, so they've got a good pack of forwards. And I was trying to work out what's the best way to play this game. And he said, well, you've been asking Jannie to play like Henry Honeyball, and he hasn't been doing very well. Why don't you ask him just to play like Jannie De Beer? So I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, no, well, Jannie's a kicking fly-off, and we're in a quarterfinal. And he loves goal kicking. I come from the Free State, and he's from the Free State. He's a great goal kicker. So I immediately went to Jannie, who was on. Jannie was he was in the 4-ball, but he was with Bron. And I went to Jannie and I said, Jannie, what? Do you kick drop goals? He said, yeah, I love kicking goals. So I remember saying to him, but you haven't kicked any in the World Cup yet. Why haven't? He said, because you've been asking me to play flat, So I said to him, okay, well, I promise you don't have to do that anymore. I want you to, this is going to be a really tight game, and there are going to be opportunities. And if you think you've got a chance, kick it over. And then he said, okay, well, he likes to set up the situation. So I said, where do you like to kick it from? So he said, I like to kick it from in front of the poles, which seems to be fairly logical. But funny enough, I know that Nas Botha liked it from lineouts because he could get a long pass from Tommy du Plessis, and you take it and turn. That angle, he saw the poles really clearly, and he could kick left or right foot. He could kick it over. Anyway, Jannie said, just bring the ball into the middle of the field and pass straight back, and I'll kick it over. And he was so confident, I thought, cheapers, let's try it at practice. So we went to, rather like the Henry Honeyball practice move, went to the practice, and I told the reserves, listen, put pressure on him. And we started on the 22, and we had players taking it up, not necessarily a long way down the field, but just taking it up away from a left-hand scrum or a right-hand scrum or a line-out, take it into sort of halfway into the middle of the field, and then another loose forward from there. So it'll be Peter Muller taking it up, and then Andre Venter taking it around the corner, or Oscar Run taking it around the corner with cleaners, and then a pass straight back to Jannie. And from the 22, banged it over. And then we did it, from the other side of the field, banged it over from the 20. And we did it 10 times. He didn't miss a drop at practice, not one. And the opposition were getting off the line to put pressure, but he got himself, your path was so accurate and quick. And his hands were so good, he just turned onto his right foot and kicked them over. And I said to him, well, listen, guys, we get ourselves into the situation in their half. It's easier kicking a drop goal with Jannie than it is to score a try, I can assure you of that. And of course, the first half, we never got out of our half of that game. The referee was being particularly difficult. Fleming, I remember his name was. And we were getting penalised, and England were in our half, and we were battling. Joost scored a great try up against the touchline, and we went into half time pretty much even Stevens. It was about 23-21 or something like that. And then in the second half, we had the first opportunity, and I think it was in 17 minutes or something like that, 12 to 17. Can't remember exactly the number of minutes, but he kicked 5 drop goals in that period of time. I mean, I remember just my memory of that is seeing Martin Johnson, their captain, literally at every ruck he was looking, then he'd look up and he'd be looking over his shoulder as the ball went through the poles, And of course, Jannie's skill won us that game, obviously being told about his drop goal ability, working out a way to get the ball into an area where he was comfortable, how he could kick it. And they just, the England side was so worried about our goal kicking ability, they didn't want to give a penalty away. So they were actually a meter behind the last man's feet. So they were so deep, they backed their defense in case we tried to attack. But that doesn't help if you're getting a guy kicking a drop goal. They never got anywhere near him, So that was a very, very, satisfactory win. It really was. And what was good about it was it came from the group. It wasn't just, top down. It was in discussions. It was, getting the opinion of a player, working it through with the guy who was going to execute the plan, and getting the forwards in on it. And it was great. It worked too.
It really was great. Okay, Nick, I think you've elaborated a bit on that semi-final throughout this discussion. Let's just focus on it for one or two questions. Perhaps ironic then that Stephen Larkham would kick the drop goal. That wasn't the one that knocked us out of the World Cup. I know there was a penalty from Matt Burke later on, but how much of a sucker punch was it to lose to the Wallabies in extra time that way?
Oh, it was really... It was very, very painful because that was the final. You have to understand that France had done the most remarkable job on New Zealand, with the second half to play that they're capable of doing, but they can't repeat. They weren't a side that could repeat that performance the following weekend. And so I knew that if we'd won our semi-final and France won against New Zealand, I knew that we'd won the final. We'd win the final. France, because I know French well. I've been there for 9 years. They just can't maintain that concentration for that length of time. They've got better at it, but still at that time, I know for a fact because I know the French players and I spoke to them. They got pissed for 3 days. That's Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday. I think their first practice was about Wednesday, because they'd outdone themselves to beat New Zealand. They never thought they were going to do that. So the World Cup final was actually South Africa against Australia. Those were the two strongest teams in the world at that time. And if we managed to pull through and getting, Jannie De Beer's penalty at the end of the game still remains one of the most unbelievable feats of goal kicking that I've ever seen. I know Mark Boot is an outstanding goal kicker, and he's kicked over some kicks that are just absolutely, you just wouldn't bet on them at all. But this one, I think it was the north stand of Twickenham was open. They were doing building repairs, and there was a northwesterly wind blowing, so it was coming from the right angle, coming in through that gap. And we got a penalty about 40 meters out, just inside the 15. I think it was about 15 meters on the right-hand side. So he's kicking from the wrong side for a right-foot kicker, and he's kicking with the wind coming into him off the right to poles that are to the left of him. And I remember saying, this is a 1 in 25 chance, for him to kick this over. It'd be an extraordinary feat. And he kicked it right through the middle of the poles. It was as though that ball, he was destined to kick that over. And when you get out of the fire like that, and you're back in the change room, you really believe that maybe fate has given you that chance so that you can win the game. And we did get ahead. We got ahead. We were 3-0 up in that, and then we unfortunately missed that kickoff, and they got back to 3-3. Then it was nip and tuck, and we were fighting. It was whoever played in the opposition half. And I know I've spoken to Larkham subsequent to this, and he was kicking that to kick it dead. In those days, well, still now, you can't kick the ball over in the in-goal area, kick it dead. It's a scrum back. But if you kick a drop and it goes over, it's a 22 dropout. So they were trying to kick a drop goal dead so that we would have a 22 dropout and they would be able to have the ball in our half and then play and hopefully get a penalty. So that drop kick was on the run. He didn't steady himself. He was running and tried to kick it just as hard as he possibly could. And he hit a huge hook. It starts 10 meters outside the right-hand pole and then goes through the middle. Just one of those things in life. And then, of course, they did get a penalty, but we never would have played in our half like we did in those last 5 minutes because we were trying to obviously get back. And we had to play ball in hand rugby to try and get back there. And we made a mistake and held it on the ground or whatever it was. But that last 3 points is irrelevant because I know that if we'd been leading, we'd have played it very differently, and we had the ability to because we had a good goal kicker, a good kicker in Jannie, and it was just one of those things. What can you do in life? As I said, Ollie Leroux rolls over and there's a game in Australia and the ref doesn't give the penalty and we win it and we have this long streak. That the streak should have ended right there and then. But then I would have, I wish he had penalised me then, and Larkham had missed the drop goal. It just things if you like things to work out perfectly, obviously a World Cup win is much more important.
And speaking of which, we played the All Blacks in the third place playoff after that incredible win by the French over them in the semi-final. I've got to ask you, Nick. A lot of people say that it's a match that they don't really want to have to play in. But having won it, you've got the bronze medal. Are you happy in that moment? Or are you thinking, damn it, we should have been playing in that final in a few days' time instead?
Yeah, we played our semi-final on the Saturday. So we were all so disappointed. You go to the World Cup to win it. You don't go to come second or third or fourth. You go to win the World Cup. So when you lose it, you don't want to play that third and fourth place. You just don't. So I actually said to the players, I want you to go somewhere. Go wherever you want. Go with your mates. Go for 3 nights. So Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night. I want you back sorry. You can go Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday. I want you there. Wednesday evening, we'll have a practice on Thursday. We've trained enough. We know what we're going to do. Thursday, because I thought we were going to play against France. I didn't think France were ever going to beat New Zealand. And then, of course, I'm lying on a couch and watching the game, and I see that New Zealand are getting smashed in the second half. And now I say we're playing New Zealand again in the L, and that was horrible because I really knew that France, if they'd won or lost the semi-final, we could beat easily. But New Zealand was that you have to front up again. And then there was a lot of thinking. I thought, how am I going to get our guys to be to get right for this game. And I was very lucky that there was just the easiest thing was to say to them, this is Henry Honeyball's last game as a Springbok. He hasn't had an opportunity to play in this World Cup because of a hamstring injury. I'd like you to play for him today. Don't worry about the third, fourth place. That doesn't matter as much as, obviously we want to win, but what I really want you to do is don't let Henry down today. And it was the right thing to do because he was so respected by his teammates that we played really well. Brayton Paulser scored the most miraculous try that day, showed what he was capable of doing in the future, chipped and footballed it around and beat Christian Cullen to the put down. It was great. And the end of the game, we could have actually, I think we won 24-15 or something like that, 24-70. So it was quite close. But the end of the game, we could have scored another try. Joost went down the blind side. And he had 10 meters to go and had Stefan de Blanche free on his right-hand side. He just had to pass the ball and Stefan would have scored. But I think he wanted to score and try himself, gave the dummy and was tackled. And but we won the game. We won the game anyway. So it's bittersweet. You don't really care. But I was really happy for Henry Honeyball that his only World Cup game was a win. And the players played their hearts out for him. So we got that right at least.
And a win over the All Blacks, no less. Nick, speaking of the All Blacks, you had a great record against New Zealand. As it turns out, after that 2000 win at Ellis Park, that incredible match that you spoke of earlier, the 46-40, that meant that you played the All Blacks 7 times and you beat them 4. 4 out of 7. The only Springbok coach since we returned from isolation that can boast that kind of record is Jacques Nienaber. So I've got to ask you, what is the secret to beating the Kiwis?
I don't think there's any real secret. They're our biggest challenge. There's no question about it that South Africans look at New Zealand as our toughest game. whether at one moment it's England who's the best team in the world, the next moment it's Ireland. Maybe France can do a job on you at some point, but through longevity and through history and tradition, New Zealand are the team that South Africans want to play against, and we want to beat. And they've been the team that has comfortably beaten us for especially since we got back after into from isolation, and we started into the new democratic South Africa, and we were able to play New Zealand. They had a long period of dominating us. We struggled. We beat them in the World Cup final in '95. But you think of the number of times they've beaten us very comfortably. So you have to be up for it physically. They're a team. They respect us physically, and they can match us physically when they get it right. I think we are more physical, but they are a team that can really get up for it. They're very skillful. Outstandingly skillful backline players. Play a beautiful brand of rugby. But South Africa has the ability and the players to do it. If we get the coaching right, if we get the selection right, if we get the captaincy and the leadership right in the team, we can beat anyone in the world. And we've proven that with the last two World Cups under Rafi Erasmus and beating the British Lions. So at the time I was doing it, it was it wasn't habitual that we beat New Zealand. If you go back before, we hadn't beaten them in New Zealand, I think, since that tour in 1981. I think that was the last time, the 17 years that a Springbok side hadn't beaten New Zealand in New Zealand. And it's one of the things that group of players can be very proud of is our record against New Zealand. In fact, I think we had a winning record against everyone except for Australia. Australia, I think we played them 8 times, and I think they beat us 5 out of 8. And I give them credit; they were a very, very tough team to beat. The moment they got Rod McQueen as coach, and they had a really good group of players. There's no question. As soon as if Australia have a top front 5, then they've got the back line and the loose trio to match anyone in the world. And at that time, they had a very good and a leader who was a lock forward. So I found Australia harder to beat. We found Australia harder to beat at that time than New Zealand.
And speaking of Australia, after that 46-40 win against the All Blacks at Ellis Park, we played Australia in Durban. And Nick, you made a few comments in the press conference. You mentioned the press a little bit earlier about match ticket prices. Can you remind our viewers what exactly it was that you actually said?
No, it was actually before the game. Hey, it was on the Friday. I was moving out of the team room, and there were 2 ladies outside. And I said, guys, this is private. This is the team room. And they said, oh, sorry, we were just trying to, and they were carrying pen and paper, and I thought they wanted the players' autographs. So I said to them, there's a photo opportunity at 10 o'clock, and you can get their autographs there. And one of them said to me, Nick, we've been trying to get tickets. We can't get tickets for the game. And I said, no, it's really difficult. There are tickets, but they're very expensive. And without introducing herself or saying that I'm a journalist and can I quote you, she took down a lot of the stuff that I said about, that it is expensive and that it's a pity that the South African Rugby Union was charging the Sharks, what they were charging for the game. In fact, I see now that the provinces are still complaining about the amount they have to pay. Sorry, so it hasn't gone away. And at the time, the ticket prices I think were 220 rand a ticket, the average monthly salary back in 2000 and 2000 was between 3,000 and 5,000 rand. So if you took a family of 4, that was 1,000 rand. You was gone out of your budget. So they were very, very expensive for lower income and middle income people. It was the test matches were really only for companies who could afford to go and guys who were very wealthy. And so I don't back off from what I said, and I really do believe that there are ways and means of earning money through sponsorship and through television rights and stuff that you don't have to ping the guys who go to the game. But it was obviously an opportunity for the South African Rugby Union to say, listen, you've stepped over the mark here. You criticised South African rugby. It's been public, and so there was a disciplinary hearing. But fortunately, they came and at the disciplinary hearing they said, listen, we'd like to settle. If you and they settled. So. I was quite happy to fight it because I knew that I would never have said those things if I'd known that I was going to be quoted in the newspaper, and I wouldn't have said it at a press conference. It was I just wasn't aware that person was going to quote me on it. So, listen, the relationship had broken down. I think we've got to be used. We've got to understand that as well. They wanted a different coach. I'd been there for 3 years, and I'd gone through a World Cup cycle. It was my first year into the second cycle. I would have had to stay for 6 years, and maybe they just thought, no, we don't want this guy around for that length of time. And it was a sad way to finish. But it was through an agreement. There was no found guilty or anything like that. And I was able to go and coach in France, coach Stade Francais, and we won 2 French championships in the 2 years I coached them there. So I got my confidence back. I knew that I was a decent coach by the fact that having left the Springboks, I was able to go and do a similar job with another good team, professional team overseas. And that was what was important. I mean, you've got young children, they're going through school, you're 43, 44 years old. It's a long time you've still got ahead of you in terms of earning money. So the financial side is important, but it was the right time to leave Saru, both from my side and from their side.
Given what you've just said, I have to ask you, Nick, do you think that if we had beaten Australia in that Tri-Nations game in Durban, that might have been something that would have seen you continue a little bit longer in the job?
No, I don't. I think that the decision had already been taken by the executive that it was necessary to have a change of coach. I'm absolutely honest with you. I work quite well downwards. So I work well with my assistant coaches. I work quite well with my players. And I'm pretty open. As we've said in a couple of the moves that we have, I'm open to discussions. I love the players coming to me with ideas. I love the coaches coming to me with ideas. I'm not dictatorial in that sense. But I don't like working upwards. I don't like working with people telling me what to do. I'm not good at that at all. So I think in this day and age, or that day and age, you had to be good at working upwards as well as downwards. You had to be able to manage expectations from your from your executive, and I just wanted them to concentrate on the financial aspect of rugby and the business side of it, and leave me to do. And I'll do 2 years. If you don't think I'm good enough after 2 years, then get someone else. That's fine, But halfway through a contract, if you've given and agreed to a contract, then don't interfere. And that was my view of it. And right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It was 2 differing opinions. But you will find now that every coach has what I wanted. Rusty Erasmus runs the team. He runs all the rugby side. In fact, he has far more control over things than I ever did. I mean, he would have been able to say, Steer Khaleesi, you're going to step out of Stormers rugby for 3 months because we want to make sure that you're going to be fit for a World Cup. That's within. It wasn't within my authority to do that. But now, as the director of rugby and head coach of the Springboks, he's able to control, and that's 100% correct. It's exactly the same with Alex Ferguson or with Arsene Wenger. With Klopp, the top soccer sides, the manager, the guy who coaches, the head guy, controls the sport. He controls the playing aspect and the selection aspect, and his coaches everything around that. So he works downwards, and then the business side is an owner, or in our case in South Africa, it was an executive. And they leave, nowadays, they leave the coach to get on with it, and they say, listen, we're not happy with you, we'll pay you out. They've got the right to do that at any time. At any time, as they did with me. I mean, they could have said to me, Nick, we're going to pay you out your contract. We just don't feel you're the right person to do the job. They didn't have to find a ticket prices thing to try and fire me without having to pay me out. That's what I was a bit upset about, that it was clear that clear in my mind anyway, that the ticket price issue was being used as a means to get rid of me without having to pay out my contract. And obviously, as a 44-year-old with kids at school, that didn't work for me. So I'm just glad that it's a long time ago, and things we've worked through all those things. I mean, I made the mistake with Gary Teichmann. I think that the South African Rugby Union didn't handle that situation with me very well either.
Nick, I've had Dick Muir on the show before. He told me an hilarious story about how the players gave you sleeping tablets on an end-of-year tour in 1996 when you were the assistant coach. Quite a funny moment. I wonder, is there a particularly funny moment that you can share with us from your time as the head coach of the Springboks?
Oh, I would have used that one. Because it's the sort of thing that I think is fantastic, and that gives you an example of how you bridge the amateur to the professional game. We were in that era where the amateur guys, you could still play tricks. You could still go out and have a few beers. It was, you had to win as a professional rugby player, but guys weren't doing, studying the opposition for 2 hours a day, going to gym for 2 hours a day, then having a defense session for an hour, and then having a cool down in ice bath. That wasn't happening in our day. So we were still practicing, once, maybe twice a day, but it was just a more relaxed atmosphere, I think. From the amateur era, we hadn't completely gone across to being fully professional yet, although the Europeans would say that the Southern Hemisphere, we got there quicker than they did. And I think from a physical point of view, we did. We had big, strong, powerful guys. But what they did was, I thought, in retrospect, very amusing and well done to them. It's the sort of thing I would have probably done as a player myself. But funny, they're often hidden from you. The funny issues are between the players and other players and catching guys out and all that. But there was an incident when I was coaching the Barbarians, which I could tell you about, and in the Barbarians team, there was always one guy who's not an international. And I was coaching, and I said, listen, if I coach, we're playing against a very strong side. We're playing against New Zealand at the end of their tour. So I said, I'd like a combination of Australian and South African players who are on tour, which I will select. And then I'll select a guy who's not an international. And I selected Veer, who's played all those caps. He's had all those caps for Scotland. But it was right back when he was about 24 as a tight head prop. I said, I've seen him play. And he played for Northern Free State and then went to Free State, and I think he's got the ability to play. Veer had never been to Bloemfontein really prior to he was born and grew up in Welkom, so to go overseas to London was a massive thing for him. And the team that I selected had in it some naughty guy. I mean, Victor Matfield is and Jacques Fourie in particular, the centre, they're very naughty guys. So Veer was, now he was one of the boys, and he was walking around. And in that Barbarians week, you have a hell of a party. It's really only on Thursday night that you concentrate on the game on Saturday. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are basically bonding, getting to know the other guys and having fun. And at one of these dinners, he was a red wine drinker. So what they decided to do was get every guy in the team to go up and have a toast to him with a red wine drink and say, just well done, congratulations on here's a glass of red wine. So Veer drank between 12 and 15, 20. I'm not sure how many glasses of red wine, but he really had a bad day. So he went to bed, and then what they did was he fell asleep in a pair of red scants, the very tight red scants. I mean, probably tighter than Faf de Klerk scants, and he was lying on top of his bed, not underneath it in London. He was sharing with Jacques Fourie. So he'd gone to sleep, and it was only going to sleep for half an hour, and it was 3:30 in the morning or something. And they switched the light on, and they had someone filming him. And Jacques Fourie shook him in the bed and said, "Come on, we're late for the bus, we've got to get this." And he jumped out of bed, and they're filming him jumping out of bed, and he staggers off, and then he just fell forward into the cupboard. And then he pushes himself onto his feet, and he said, "Ek kan nie meer nie, ek kan nie meer." I mean, it's half an hour after he's just put his head, and they've got it on film. I mean, I just thought it was hysterical. I mean, we got that, and that was a fantastic. We were the second Barbarians team ever to beat the All Blacks. So, that sort of just works. But those sort of naughty things that the players do, it's not so much the coach. You can't really get involved in that type of stuff. But it was it was, I'm sure that happens on every tour, those sort of naughty aspects, sides of things.
That's a wonderful story. Nick, is there a player who is currently on the field that you admire?
But now in the professional era, I admire them all. It's the most. If you think that where does the season start and end, it just doesn't. It doesn't start or end. If you're a South African playing in South Africa and you're a Springbok, you play the URC. The moment you finish the URC final or the Investec Cup final, you go straight into preparations for the June-July tour, which is we're playing against Ireland. It's going to be this year the best team in the Northern Hemisphere, definitely, and the team we've struggled to beat the most. So that's hugely intense. You then go into the Rugby Championship. You finish the Rugby Championship, and you've got URC, and then you go on a November tour, and then you're into the Rugby Championship again. I mean, where do you ever stop? So, I think that a global season is something we've got to get, and that's something that needs to be worked out. 9, maximum 10 months in a year, but there's got to be 2 years off. I mean, logically, you would like to take off, December, January, something like that. But it's a question of the Northern Hemisphere fitting into the Southern Hemisphere or vice versa. As to the players, that, as I said, I admire them all. At the time, there used to be a time when a Dan Carter would just stick out, or a Johnny Wilkinson would stick out, or a Nas Botha, generally fly-offs because they'd be kicking goals and winning World Cups. What I loved about the South African World Cup win was the unity of that group. It wasn't 15, it was 23. It wasn't 23, it was 30. Because the guys who weren't in the team were practicing as the opposition. No, I've just got so much respect for professional rugby players everywhere. And even though Ireland, perhaps they got knocked out in the quarterfinal, the way they play, the continuity and the way they play is just incredible. The team is better than the individuals in it. And in our South African, our team is better than each individual in it. I think Dupont, if you had to put me on the spot, who would you say? 2 players that I think Eben Etzebeth, just a colossus, an absolutely brilliant Springbok rugby player. Possibly won that game against France on his own with that pulling back the pass. And then Dupont, Dupont is, without him, France are half a team. With him, they can be the best team in the world. So those 2 guys, if you had to push me, but I respect for every single professional rugby player at the moment.
Nick, we've seen you on SuperSport quite a lot. What else are you up to these days?
Well, at the moment I'm visiting my grandchildren. I'm reaching that age. I've been fortunate. I've worked a lot in Europe, so I know France well. I know Italy well. My son's in England. My daughter's in Amsterdam. Our grandkids are over here. So usually travel quite a bit. I play golf quite a bit. I work with SuperSport when I can, do talks when I can, when I'm asked to do talks. I probably had the best life possible. I mean, how many people in the world can play the game they love, can be a player coach of the game they love, can be a coach of the game they love, and talk about the game that they love? And I've been able to do all of those. And this is my coming up to the 68th birthday. So, I've been, truly, truly blessed. And rugby has given me that opportunity. It's just been the most marvelous sport to be a part of. And I've loved every single moment. So I'll still be involved in rugby. I'll still, when I say involved, even in a voluntary capacity as I get older, just as a consultant or a mentor, that's hopefully, people can, bounce ideas off me and tap into the experience that I've made. I always think you learn the most from your mistakes. So to be able to advise other people not to make the same mistakes that I did, I think that would be fantastic.
Nick, you've actually just reminded me while you mentioned, the incredible life that you've had. A few years ago, well, I say a few years ago, it's probably 25 years ago now, there was a book that came out. It was a biography. I think John Dobson was actually the writer, the current Stormers coach's father. Nick Mallett, The Story So Far. Yeah. Don't you think it's time for an updated autobiography?
No, I think I've got a wife who enjoys privacy, and there's no question that if I wrote if I wrote about what happened from the story so far onwards, I mean, there's so many incidents and issues that I would, dig up and raise, and that it would be, it would be all in the papers again. It would all be, and I don't think it's worthwhile doing that. I don't, certainly not for her, and not for me either. It's part and parcel of life, and it's your ability to get over. I mean, I took a knock with the Springbok, with the Springbok situation. But I managed to get back on my feet with coaching at Stade Francais, coaching in France, being able to win a big championship twice with them. The second year was really difficult. It was 2003, 2004, and it was World Cup year, and it's always difficult getting your players back after a Rugby World Cup. That's the big thing. They don't want to play, for their club after a Rugby World Cup. It's sort of like difficult for them to motivate themselves. We just have to look at the Sharks this year with their Springbok cohorts and how difficult it's been for them to get them going. And that's what. So, but we managed to get through, and we won the championship again. And then coaching in Italy, that was a real challenge. Coaching a team that is a burgeoning new rugby nation, and how they've kicked on, how they've got into the rugby. Into the Six Nations. They've reduced the number of points that they have when they do lose, and they did really well. 1-2 and drew 1 this year. Fantastic. So, it's been it's been a good life.
It certainly has. Let's finish off by looking at that trivia question again. Who captained the Springboks against Romania at the 1995 Rugby World Cup? Do you know the answer, Nick?
I do. Adrian Richter.
That is exactly right. Adrian Richter. I actually had him as a guest on the show as well. One of the early episodes of Front Row Rugby. That is the correct answer, Adrian Richter. We won that match as well. He scored 2 tries, and then he scored another 2 tries in the test after that against Canada. And so him and Chester Williams were actually our 2 top try scorers in 1995 with 4 each. Nick, let me say it was wonderful having you on Front Row Rugby today. An absolute pleasure. I think that this is actually the longest interview that we've ever done on Front Row Rugby. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a real pleasure. You can cut out as much as you like, please. Pleasure chatting to you. Thanks a lot.
Last time on Front Row Rugby, Willie Meyer was my guest. You can go and watch that video. It's appearing on your screen right now. Next time, Chris Badenhorst will be here.